You don't need to do anything. Just listen and let go.
So picture this, total darkness, like when you wake up at 3 a.m. and can't even see your hand in front of your face. Just nothingness everywhere. No stars, no earth, not even a whisper of wind. Then boom, gods like let there be light. And suddenly, there's this warm glow spreading everywhere, like when someone slowly turns up a dimmer switch. At first it was just light, no sun yet, or anything fancy like that. Just soft brightness filling up all that empty space. God saw how nice it looked and decided to call this light day and the leftover darkness night. First day done, and honestly, pretty good start if you ask me. Next up was the sky. God made this huge gap between the waters below and the waters above, like separating milk from cereal before you eat it. He called the gap sky, and that was day 2. Nothing too complicated, just giving everything some breathing room up there. Then God gathered all the water into big pools so dry ground could pop up. Dirt, sand, rocks, all that good earthy stuff. And once the land was dry, he went, oh, plants. And just like that, grass sprouted everywhere. Trees grew tall real quick, some with fruit already hanging off them. Day 3 was basically God going full gardener mode. Now the sky needed some decoration, so God made 2 big lights, the sun for daytime and the moon for nighttime. Tossed in some stars too, like sprinkling glitter across black construction paper. That way people would always have something pretty to look at when they glanced upward. Day 4 was all about celestial interior design. Next came the oceans. God filled them up with fish, little ones, that dart around like they're late for something, big lazy ones that just float along. Then birds appeared, swooping through the sky like they'd been practicing forever. Funny how seagulls basically looked the same from day 1. Day 5 was basically God showing off his animal-making skills. Then God went wild with land animals. Dogs that wagged before they even knew why. Cats that acted like they owned the place immediately. Cows chewing like they're lost in thought. Squirrels running laps for no reason. The whole planet suddenly felt like someone left the TV on to an animal documentary channel. Super lively. Last came the big project people. God shaped them from dirt like a kid playing with clay, then breathed life right into them. First thing they did, probably blinked a lot and wondered what all this bright stuff was. God put them in charge of everything, which seems like a lot of responsibility for beings who just learned what sunlight was. He set them down in this garden that was basically nature's 5-star resort. Trees with fruit you could just pick and eat. Rivers that didn't need filtering. Flowers that smelled better than any candle store. No weeds, yet either gardening was gonna be super easy mode. Animals wandered up curiously to check out the new arrivals. The dogs probably loved them immediately, tails going crazy. Cats sized them up before deciding humans made acceptable servants. Birds landed on shoulders like they'd waiting their whole lives for this exact moment. God looked at everything, the light, the water, the animals, the people, and gave it all a big thumbs up. Like when you finish cleaning your room and just stand there admiring your work. Everything was exactly how it should be, humming along perfectly. Time to kick back and enjoy day 7. The first humans wandered around touching stuff like kids in a toy store, poking leaves to see if they moved, dipping fingers in the river, just because they could. Every new thing was fascinating, like how rainbows looked way better in person than any picture could show. Meanwhile, the animals were figuring out their roles. Bees got straight to work on the flowers. Ants started organizing tiny conferences under rocks. The lions yawned a lot to show off their teeth, but mostly just napped in sunbeams. Everyone sort of fell into place naturally. God checked in sometimes, walking through the garden like a proud homeowner giving a tour, pointing out cool features. See how the river bends here? That's my favorite part. The whole place had this peaceful vibe, like Sunday morning stretched out forever. The woman found a butterfly perched on her finger and just about lost her mind. It's got tiny legs, she whisper-yelled, trying not to scare it off. The butterfly stayed put like it knew it was starring in the world's first magical moment. Over by the trees, the man was having deep thoughts with a turtle moving at the speed of philosophy. They matched paces perfectly, him slowing down, the turtle speeding up just slightly. Neither seemed in any particular hurry to be anywhere else. Evening rolled around with that golden light that makes everything look softer. Fireflies showed up right on cue, like someone flipped a switch labeled ambience. Their little lights blinked on and off like the first Christmas lights ever invented. The woman plopped down in some grass that somehow didn't leave itchy marks. She watched clouds drift by that looked suspiciously like animals she'd just met that day. One even looked like that turtle her husband was still philosophizing with. Over at the riverbank, fish were doing that thing where they jump for no reason. Splash, pause, splash again, like they were testing how water worked. A heron watched them with the patience of someone who'd been doing this forever. Back under the trees, the man finally noticed his stomach making noises. He reached up and picked a fruit without even looking like his hand just knew where to go. First bite was all crunch, then sweet juice that somehow didn't drip down his chin. A rabbit hopped over to investigate the crumbs, nose twitching faster than a drummer keeping time. The woman laughed when it stood up on hind legs, like a tiny waiter hopping for a tip. She tossed it a berry that the rabbit caught midair like it had been practicing that move for years. Somewhere in the bushes, a cricket started tuning up for the evening concert. One tentative chirp, then another slightly louder, until suddenly the whole garden was full of them, going full orchestra mode. The sound wrapped around everything like an invisible blanket. The man stretched out on the grass, while fireflies circled overhead like tiny planes waiting to land. One actually did right on his nose, which made both humans giggle until their ribs hurt. The firefly seemed confused by all the attention, like, guys, it's just me standing here. Meanwhile, a family of ducks waddled past like they had reservations somewhere important. The littlest duckling kept tripping over its own feet, but never slowed down, determined to keep up with the group. It reminded the woman of that time she tried jogging in sandals last summer. Up in the trees, monkeys were testing out different fruits like picky customers at a buffet. One tossed aside a mango with such dramatic disgust you'd think it had personally offended him. Another monkey caught it midair and shrugged like more for me then. Down by the riverbank, the fish had finally stopped jumping and settled into lazy circles near the surface. Their gills pulsed rhythmically, synchronized like they were all listening to the same underwater beat. The water reflected the sunset perfectly, nature's version of Instagram filters, but way better. A deer wandered over to drink, pausing mid-sip when it noticed the humans watching. Its ears twitched left, right, left, like satellite dishes, scanning for danger, before deciding these weird, hairless creatures weren't worth freaking out about. It went back to drinking like nothing happened. The woman found a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. It bounced 3 times before sinking. The fish barely flinched, probably thinking, oh cool, free entertainment. The man tried next, but his stone went plop straight down, making them both crack up like it was the funniest failed attempt ever. Meanwhile, the first stars started popping up overhead like someone slowly turning on Christmas lights. One particularly bright one seemed to wink at them, though it was probably just atmospheric conditions or whatever. Still nice to pretend though. Somewhere in the bushes, 2 baby foxes started play fighting over absolutely nothing important. They tumbled around like fuzzy socks in a dryer, all paws and tails, and 0 coordination. The woman had to bite her lip to keep from squealing at the cuteness overload. Over by the riverbank, the water started making that soft, lapping sound it does when nobody's talking. Like it was humming to itself while tidying up before bed. The fish kept time with little fin flicks, totally in sync with the rhythm. The man found a perfectly round pebble and rolled it between his fingers like he was considering something deep. Then he just chucked it into the water for no reason, except that it felt satisfying. The splash made a ring of ripples that spread out lazily, like the water wasn't in any hurry to flatten out again. Somewhere behind them, an owl hooted like it was testing its microphone before the night shift started. The woman turned toward the sound so fast her hair whipped around. But of course, the owl had already gone ninja mode silent. Typical owl behavior, honestly. The fireflies had synchronized their blinks by now, poolsing together like a slow breathing pattern. It made the whole garden feel alive in this gentle, glowy way. Like if you squinted, you could see the planet's heartbeat right there in the grass. Up in the branches, a squirrel made this weird, chattering noise at nothing in particular. Probably complaining about some squirrel drama the humans wouldn't understand. Then it shoved an entire acorn in its mouth like a chipmunk storing a basketball, which seemed physically impossible. But there it was. The woman found a patch of clover and started counting leaves just for fun. 4 leaves, 5 leaves. Then she gasped at a 7-leaf, one like she'd won the botanical lottery. The rabbit came over to sniff it suspiciously, like, yeah, okay, cool, I guess, before hopping off to find better snacks. Somewhere deep in the forest, 2 trees creaked together in the breeze, making this low moaning sound. The man tilted his head like he was trying to decipher tree language. They're either telling secrets or just really bad at whispering, he decided, which made the woman snort laugh into her hands. Meanwhile, a line of ants marched past carrying bits of leaves twice their size. They moved in this perfect zigzag pattern, like they'd practiced the routine a million times. One ant dropped its load and just stood there for a second, antennae drooping, like, Mondays, am I right? Before picking it back up and soldiering on. Over by the berry bushes, the woman noticed how some berries looked juicier than others for no particular reason. She picked one at random, and it exploded with flavor so intense her eyes watered a little. The juice stained her fingers purple red, like she'd been doodling with markers. The man found a stick that was somehow the perfect balance of weight and length. He gave it an experimental swing, sending a few leaves tumbling through the air. A sparrow immediately dive-bombed to snatch one mid-flight, like it was playing the world's easiest game of fetch. Somewhere far off, a waterfall made that constant shushing sound that makes you want to whisper. The mist caught the last of the sunlight just right, creating tiny rainbows that appeared and disappeared too fast to point out. The whole scene looked like someone had set nature's screensaver to maximum pretty. A bee bumbled past the woman's face, its legs loaded down with pollen like tiny grocery bags. It hovered for a second like it was checking her out before deciding nah and veering off toward some brighter flowers. She could have sworn it gave her the equivalent of a bee wink before buzzing away. Meanwhile, the man found a mushroom that looked exactly like a tiny stool. He crouched down and pretended to have a serious conversation with it, nodding along like the mushroom was giving great advice. Yeah, that makes sense. Wait, really? He murmured, playing along until a real snail crawled onto the scene and stole the mushroom's spotlight. The clouds overhead started doing that thing where they turn pink right before dark, like someone had spilled juice across the sky. Shadows stretched out lazily across the grass, not in any hurry to finish their nightly crawl across the garden. Everything smelled like warm earth and flowers that had been baking in the sun all day. A frog plopped into the river with a splash that sounded exactly like someone dropping a wet sponge. It surfaced, with its eyes bulging out comically, looking around like, "Who threw me in here?" before kicking off into a smooth backstroke toward the opposite bank. The woman noticed how the tree bark felt different depending on which side you touched, rough like sandpaper in the shade, smooth as polished wood where the sun had warmed it. She ran her fingers along both textures like she was reading some kind of nature braille. Meanwhile, the man discovered that if he blew softly across the top of a hollow reed, it made this weird kazoo sound that startled a nearby flock of sparrows into flight. Their wings made this collective whoosh that sounded like someone ruffling a giant deck of cards. The woman found a vine draped perfectly between two trees like nature's own hammock. She tested it carefully with one finger first, because, let's be honest, vines aren't exactly known for their reliability. But this one held firm like it had been professionally installed. Somewhere in the bushes, a family of mice had discovered the berry juice stains on the woman's fingers and were debating whether to risk climbing her arm for a taste. Their tiny whiskers twitched in unison, like they were holding some sort of rodent board meeting. The sunset had shifted to that deep orange color that makes everything look like it's been dipped in honey. Even the ants marching across the grass cast long shadows that made them look like some kind of epic fantasy army on a quest. A fat bumblebee landed on the man's knee with all the grace of a dropped tennis ball. It sat there, catching its breath, wings buzzing tiredly like someone who just run up 3 flights of stairs. The man held perfectly still, afraid to breathe too loud in case he offended bee etiquette. Meanwhile, the woman discovered that if she blew gently on a dandelion puff, the seeds didn't just float away. They spiraled upward like tiny helicopters, catching the last golden light in ways that made her gasp every single time. She was on her 7th dandelion before she realized she should probably leave some for tomorrow. Somewhere in the bushes, a cricket started up its evening song again, but this time it sounded different, slower, sleepier, like it was humming a lullaby to itself. The rhythm matched perfectly with the firefly's glowing pulses, creating this soft, natural symphony that made eyelids feel suddenly heavy. The man yawned so wide his jaw cracked, which startled a nearby chipmunk into dropping its acorn. It gave him this look like, "Really, dude?" before scrambling to pick it back up. The woman giggled at the chipmunk's offended expression, but even her laughter was starting to sound drowsy around the edges. Up in the trees, the monkeys had finally stopped their fruit tasting and settled into leafy nests, arms draped over their eyes like tiny sunbathers, calling it a day. One kept mumbling in its sleep, probably still complaining about that mango from earlier. The river had slowed to a gentle murmur, its surface reflecting the stars so clearly it looked like someone had spilled a bucket of glitter across black velvet. Fish drifted lazily near the bottom, their fins moving just enough to stay in place, like they were floating in zero gravity. A warm breeze ruffled the woman's hair, carrying the smell of ripe figs from somewhere upwind. She inhaled deeply, trying to memorize this exact moment. The way the air tasted, how the grass tickled her bare feet, even that one cricket that kept missing its note every third chirp. Meanwhile, the man had found the perfect patch of moss to sprawl on, softer than any mattress. He stretched out his arms and legs like making a snow angel, except instead of snow, it was just contentment settling over him like a cozy blanket. Somewhere nearby, a family of hedgehogs trundled past in a sleepy parade, their tiny feet making the softest crunching sounds in the grass. The leader kept nodding off mid-step, waking up just in time to avoid bumping into a tree root. The whole scene was so peaceful, it almost hurt to watch. The woman stretched out on her back and watched fireflies spelling out lazy patterns overhead. Their lights blurred as her eyelids grew heavier, creating slow-motion constellations that appeared and vanished before she could name them. A particularly bold firefly landed on her fingertip, pulsing gently like a living nightlight. Meanwhile, the man noticed how the stars seemed brighter whenever he blinked, little bursts of extra sparkle sneaking past his tired eyelids. He counted them between breaths, but kept losing track somewhere after 12, the numbers melting together like sugar in warm milk. Down by the water's edge, the frogs had started their nightly chorus, but tonight it sounded slower, deeper, like someone had turned down the tempo on nature's soundtrack. Even the ripples from a jumping fish moved outward in slow motion, as if the whole world was gently winding down for the night. The woman turned her head to watch a moth flutter around a glowing flower, its wings brushing petals with such delicate precision it looked like choreography. Each movement sent tiny puffs of pollen drifting through the air, sparkling in the firelight like someone had shaken a snow globe full of gold dust. Meanwhile, the man traced idle patterns in the dirt with one finger, watching how the lines caught the fading light. A line of ants detoured respectfully around his fingertip, carrying bedtime snacks back to their nest, crumbs of fruit, and tiny flower petals, bundled like picnic supplies for miniature travelers. Somewhere beyond the trees, the last birds of daylight exchanged sleepy goodnight calls with the first owls of evening, their voices overlapping in a drowsy duet that stretched across the darkening sky. The whole garden seemed to exhale slowly, settling into itself like a contented cat curling up by the fire. A lazy dragonfly drifted past the woman's nose, its wings moving so slowly she could count the individual panes of its stained glass wings. It hovered for a heartbeat long enough for her to notice how its body caught the last firefly glow, before vanishing into the shadows like a thought forgotten mid-sentence. The man absently plucked a blade of grass and let it flutter from his fingertips, watching it spiral downward in slow loops like a leaf falling through molasses. It landed perfectly balanced on a spiderweb stretched between two twigs, the silk threads bouncing gently as if applauding the flawless landing. Meanwhile, the moon peeked over the treetops with the shyness of someone arriving late to a party, its pale light spilling across the grass in silver puddles. The shadows it cast weren't sharp or scary, just soft outlines that made familiar bushes look like sleeping giants wrapped in velvet blankets. A lone cricket had taken up position on a flat rock near the riverbank, its chirps now perfectly timed with the rise and fall of the frogs croaking. Together, they created a rhythm, so soothing it seemed to slow the very rotation of the earth, stretching seconds into minutes filled with nothing but peaceful breathing. The woman curled onto her side, one arm pillowing her head as she watched a spider meticulously repair its web between two fern fronds. Each silken thread glistened with dew already forming, turning the whole structure into a chandelier made of liquid diamonds and patience. Somewhere beyond their little clearing, the night breeze stirred the leaves into whispering gossip, but the words were too soft and muddled to understand. Just the comforting murmur of nature tucking itself in for the night. The air smelled like crushed mint and warm soil, with just a hint of honey lingering from flowers that had closed their petals hours ago. The last fireflies drifted toward the treetops, their lights dimming gradually like candles burning down in an empty room. One lingered near the man's outstretched hand, pulsing slower and slower until it rested on his palm completely still, its tiny light now steady as a bedside lamp left on for children afraid of the dark. Over by the berry bushes, a mother fox gathered her kits by scruffing them one by one, their sleepy protests muffled against her fur as she deposited them in a tangled pile of tails and tiny paws. She circled 3 times before settling around them, her breath creating gentle ripples across their fur like wind over tall grass. The river had gone completely still now, its surface mirroring the moon so perfectly it looked like someone had polished the night sky between their hands. Fish suspended motionless beneath, their gills flaring occasionally, as if breathing in time with the sleeping garden around them. One synchronized sigh stretching across water, earth, and sky. A cluster of mushrooms near the base of an oak tree suddenly glowed faintly, their caps pulsing with bioluminescent light like nature's version of a nightlight. The soft blue radiance illuminated dewdrops clinging to blades of grass, turning each into a miniature lantern strung along unseen threads between earth and stars. The man's fingers twitched slightly in sleep, brushing against a patch of clover that immediately curled its leaves inward, as if tucking itself in two. Nearby, the woman murmured something indistinct that made a dreaming rabbit's nose wiggle in response. its whiskers trembling like compass needles, pointing toward some secret only animals could sense. High above, the constellations had rearranged themselves into unfamiliar patterns, not the rigid shapes humans would later name, but fluid designs that shifted whenever clouds passed by, as if the sky itself was doodling in the margins of night with a finger dipped in starlight. A family of raccoons waddled single file along the riverbank, their paws leaving perfect wet prints that glistened under the moonlight before evaporating like temporary tattoos on the earth's skin. The smallest one paused to examine its reflection, then startled itself with a sneeze that sent ripples racing across the mirrored sky. Deep in the undergrowth, a single dandelion seed that had escaped earlier floated downward in slow spirals, finally landing atop a sleeping turtle's shell, where it balanced precariously, turning the reptile into an accidental mobile garden drifting through dreamscapes. Meanwhile, the spider had finished repairing its web and now sat motionless at the center, its 8 legs arranged symmetrically like the hands of a clock frozen at precisely 3:33 a.m. That magical hour when even time seems to hold its breath between yesterday and tomorrow. A family of snails began their nightly commute along a fallen log, leaving behind silvery trails that caught the moonlight in such a way that the entire path looked like someone had unspooled a roll of liquid mercury across the wood. The smallest snail paused frequently to peer at its reflection in these accidental mirrors, seemingly fascinated by how its eyes waved like tiny sea anemones on stalks. Up in the branches, a single oak leaf loosened its grip with an almost audible sigh, drifting downward in lazy loops that alternated between catching the glow of bioluminescent mushrooms and disappearing into shadow, like a shy performer alternating between spotlight and wings during a slow-motion curtain call. Somewhere beyond the clearing, a stand of bamboo began its nightly stretching routine, each hollow stem creaking softly as it reached an inch higher toward the stars, their jointed segments expanding with quiet pops that sounded suspiciously like nature's version of cracking one's knuckles before bed. Underneath, a fallen log blanketed in emerald moss, a family of beetles settled into perfectly round chambers they'd polished smooth with their shiny backs, each curling into itself like living marbles tucked into velvet-lined drawers. The vibrations of their tiny snores sent ripples through dewdrops clinging to the moss overhead, making the whole structure shimmer like a chandelier in a slow-motion earthquake. Near the river's bend, water striders skated across the moon's reflection, their spindly legs dimpling the silver surface without ever breaking, through creating ephemeral constellations that bloomed and vanished with each step, as if the stars themselves were playing hopscotch on liquid glass. High in the canopy, a single disoriented firefly blinked its signal twice before giving up entirely, its light dimming to a soft amber glow that illuminated exactly 3 pine needles, and the sleepy face of a caterpillar who'd been rudely awakened, both creatures sharing a moment of wordless understanding about the frustrations of insomnia before the firefly rolled over and pretended to snore. Down by the water's edge, minnows schooled in lazy circles just beneath the surface, their silver sides flashing intermittently like someone flipping a coin over and over in slow motion, heads, tails, heads, while an elderly turtle watched from the shallows with the patient amusement of someone who'd seen this exact performance every night for the last 200 years. Meanwhile, the garden's resident mole chose this moment to surface dramatically in a shower of loose soil, his velvet nose twitching with theatrical importance as he dramatically presented one perfectly polished acorn cap before vanishing underground again. The entire spectacle witnessed only by a single confused earthworm who'd been in the middle of remembering where it left its keys. Over near the berry thicket, a young deer fawn practiced its serious, adult deer face in a puddle's reflection, screwing up its features comically before dissolving into silent laughter that made its spotted sides shake. The soundless giggles sending concentric ripples across the water's surface that traveled outward to nowhere in particular. A trio of acorns tumbled from their branch in perfect succession. Plink, plink, plunk, landing in a neat row along a mossy log like nature's own xylophone, waiting for some tiny creature to come along and play a lullaby with miniature mallets. One particularly ambitious squirrel watched the display with narrowed eyes, already planning tomorrow's breakfast. The night's first raindrop fell with improbable precision onto the tip of a single blade of grass, where it balanced for a breathless moment before sliding downward in slow motion, leaving behind a trail of glittering dew that marked its path like a dotted line drawn in liquid diamonds. Deep in the fern grove, a family of sleeping moths unconsciously synchronized their wing patterns with the rhythm of the wind, their folded wings rising and falling slightly with each breeze, creating the illusion that the entire clearing was breathing softly through hundreds of delicate velvet lungs. Meanwhile, an ambitious earthworm had begun constructing what appeared to be a miniature mud castle above ground, its coils leaving intricate spiral patterns that glistened under the moonlight like edible clay pottery left to dry overnight. Every so often, it would pause to admire its work, antennae twitching in quiet satisfaction. Up in the branches, a lone cicada shell clung stubbornly to birch bark, its hollow abdomen catching stray raindrops that transformed its empty body into a natural rain gauge, each plink echoing through the chambers like a tiny water clock, measuring out the night in liquid minutes. Down by the riverbank, a school of minnows had arranged themselves into a perfect arrow shape, pointing upstream, their bodies pulsing gently against the current, as if keeping time to some underwater lullaby only fish could hear. Occasionally, one would break formation to catch a drifting bubble, then return to its place with the precision of a dancer, remembering their steps at the last moment. Over in the meadow, the last fireflies gathered in a loose circle above a patch of clover, their lights pulsing in gradual rhythm like a heartbeat slowing for sleep. The glow illuminated a family of field mice below, their tiny paws clutching stolen dandelion fluff, which they arranged into makeshift nests, with all the care of architects designing featherlight palaces. High above, a single cloud stretched itself thin across the moon's face, transforming the silver light into a soft halo that made every dewdrop sparkle like scattered sequins on nature's dressing table. The shadow it cast drifted lazily across the sleeping garden, as gentle and unobtrusive as someone pulling a blanket over a child's shoulders without waking them. Meanwhile, the oldest oak tree in the grove exhaled a slow breath through its leaves, the sound blending seamlessly with the night breeze, until it was impossible to tell where tree ended and air began. Just one more note in the garden's endless lullaby, played on instruments grown from soil and starlight. A family of field crickets had arranged themselves on a mushroom cap like an orchestra tuning up, their legs rubbing together in perfect unison to produce a melody so soft it seemed to come from everywhere at once. The kind of music that drifts into dreams without waking the dreamer. Down by the water's edge, tadpoles drifted suspended in moonlit shallows, their tiny tails flickering occasionally like candle flames caught in slow motion. Each movement sending spiral patterns through the water that unraveled lazily before dissolving into the current's embrace. Over near the wildflower patch, a single daisy slowly closed its petals with the precision of a ballerina lowering her arms after a final bow. Its yellow center still faintly warm from the day's sun. One last secret smile before joining the rest of the garden in sleep. A family of ladybugs huddled together under a curled leaf like passengers sharing an umbrella, their spotted shells clicking softly whenever they shifted positions, creating a rhythmic percussion that blended seamlessly with the cricket's lullaby drifting through the tall grass. Up in the honeysuckle vines, two hummingbirds perched side by side on a slender branch, their iridescent throats pulsing gently as they breathed the tiny feathers along their backs, fluffing up occasionally like someone pulling a quilt higher around their shoulders against the cooling night air. Meanwhile, the river's current had slowed to barely a whisper, its surface now reflecting not just the moon, but entire constellations that dipped and swayed with each gentle ripple, as if the sky itself had decided to take a quick swim before bedtime. Underneath a particularly fuzzy fern leaf, a family of inchworms had tied themselves into cozy sleeping bags made of silk, their tiny heads just peeking out the top like nature's version of toddlers in footy pajamas, a lone firefly, perhaps the last one still awake, traced lazy figure eights around a patch of nodding bluebells, its light pulsing in time with the distant hooting of an owl, who clearly didn't realize how late it was getting. High up in the treetops, a single maple leaf released its grip with an almost imperceptible sigh, drifting downward in slow spirals that caught every available light source: moonlight, starlight, even the faint glow of foxfire mushrooms, as if determined to make its final descent the most beautiful one yet. Over by the strawberry patch, a family of slugs had arranged themselves into a neat circle, like living punctuation marks dotting the soil, their trails glistening in intersecting patterns that resembled some ancient garden language written in liquid silver. Meanwhile, the river's surface had grown so still, it reflected not just individual stars, but entire constellations with mirror-like clarity, creating the illusion that the night sky extended infinitely downward as well as upward. A universe reflected in perfect miniature by dark water and darker silt. The last awake firefly finally gave up and landed atop a closed tulip, its light dimming gradually like a child's nightlight set to a 30-minute timer, casting just enough glow to illuminate the tulip's faint freckles before surrendering to the gentle pull of sleep. Down in the cattail reeds, a mother duck tucked her head beneath one wing, while her ducklings nestled against her downy sides in a perfect feathered puzzle, their synchronized breathing creating tiny ripples across the pond's surface that spread outward before disappearing into the liquid darkness. Over by the vegetable patch, a scarecrow tilted slightly in the evening breeze, its straw fingers brushing against a climbing bean vine, with the tender care of someone adjusting a blanket around sleeping shoulders, while 3 garden spiders spun dream catchers between its outstretched arms, using nothing but moonlight and silk. Meanwhile, the oldest apple tree in the orchard released the softest creak as it settled deeper into the earth for the night, its roots exhaling faint puffs of soil-scented air that made nearby dandelion clocks tremble with invisible laughter before closing their fuzzy faces against the cooling night. Over by the wild rose bush, a family of beetles had arranged themselves petal to petal like living mosaic tiles, their iridescent shells catching the moonlight in shifting patterns that turned the entire shrub into a slowly breathing stained glass window designed by some celestial architect. Down in the vegetable patch, a particularly ambitious pumpkin vine had stealthily crept 3 inches closer to the carrot row, while everyone slept, its curling tendrils outstretched like sleepwalking fingers, caught mid-reach for a midnight snack they wouldn't remember wanting come morning. High above, the Milky Way stretched itself across the sky with the lazy satisfaction of a cat arching its back, its countless stars pulsing gently in time with the sleeping earth below. An entire universe keeping rhythm with the slow breaths of a garden dreaming in perfect harmony. Down by the old stone wall, a procession of ants carried specks of moonlight in their mandibles like tiny lanterns. Their path illuminated by glowworms embedded in the moss between stones. The entire scene resembling some ancient pilgrimage route lit by living candles. In the hollow of a fallen log, a family of field mice had arranged dried petals into overlapping layers that rustled softly whenever one turned over in sleep, creating whispers of movement that sounded suspiciously like pages turning in nature's bedtime storybook. Meanwhile, the wind itself seemed to settle into the crook of a willow's branches with a contented sigh, its invisible fingers occasionally twitching the leaves into murmurs that translated roughly as good night in every language simultaneously. Down in the clover patch, a drowsy bumblebee snored against a particularly plump flower head, its wings folded neatly like origami, while its fuzzy legs clutched a pollen bundle like a child refusing to let go of a favorite stuffed animal, even in sleep. Over by the pond's edge, water lilies folded inward with the precision of synchronized swimmers ending their routine, each one turning slightly to face the moon, as if awaiting a final cue before fully closing up shop for the night. The garden's resident hedgehog chose this moment to roll onto its back with a soft grunt, exposing its belly to the cooling night air while its tiny paws twitched occasionally, perhaps chasing dream bugs through some parallel meadow only sleepers can visit. A cluster of night blooming, jasmine unfurled its petals with the quiet drama of a magician revealing his final trick, releasing a fragrance so perfectly balanced between sweet and earthy that nearby fireflies paused mid-flight just to breathe it in deeply through their tiny glowing noses. Up in the walnut tree, a family of squirrels had arranged themselves tail to nose in their leafy nest, their synchronized breathing making the entire structure expand and contract slightly like some oversized, furry lung suspended between two sturdy branches. Meanwhile, the first dewdrops of the night began forming along spiderwebs strung between wildflowers, each tiny bead catching starlight in such a way that the entire garden seemed threaded with liquid diamonds left out to dry before morning. A lone field mouse tiptoed across a mushroom cap, its whiskers trembling as it sniffed the air, not for danger, but for the comforting scent of chamomile that always grew strongest right before midnight, when the flowers decided to share their sleepiest perfume. Over by the creek, water striders skated lazy figure eights across the moon's reflection, their delicate legs leaving fleeting silver trails that resembled celestial signatures being written and erased in endless loops across liquid parchment. Down in the vegetable patch, young pea pods clicked softly against their trellis in the breeze like wind chimes made for fairies, the hollow sound blending perfectly with the rhythmic snoring of the pumpkin vine that had finally stopped its nighttime wandering. Up in the mulberry tree, 3 caterpillars slept nose to tail in perfect spirals on their chosen leaves, their tiny bodies rising and falling in unison, as if connected by invisible threads to the same dream. Occasionally, one would twitch its antennae, sending ripples through the silk blankets they'd spun for themselves earlier. Over by the stone path, a line of sleeping snails had left behind silvery trails that glowed faintly under starlight, creating a shimmering dotted line that led nowhere in particular, but looked important enough that nobody questioned its purpose. Meanwhile, the garden's oldest sunflower nodded its heavy head slightly lower with each passing minute, its dark center now hosting a sleepy bumblebee who'd mistaken the flower's warm embrace for an actual bed. Not that the sunflower minded, having spent all day pretending to be the sun anyway. Over in the wild mint patch, 2 fireflies had settled onto the same leaf by accident, their lights poolsing out of sync at first before gradually matching rhythms, creating a soft heartbeat glow that made the entire bush seem alive with some secret, leafy respiration. Down by the creek's edge, a family of tadpoles slept suspended in moonlit shallows, their tiny tails occasionally twitching in unison like synchronized sleep swimmers, practicing some aquatic ballet they'd perform upon waking. The last awake cricket finally tucked its legs beneath itself with a contented chirp, its song fatting mid-note, as if someone had gently closed the lid of nature's music box for the night. In the lavender patch, blossoms released one final sigh of perfume that drifted upward to mingle with the stars, their purple spikes bobbing slightly like metronomes, keeping time for sleeping bees. A trio of mushrooms at the base of an oak tree glowed faintly in synchronized pulses, their bioluminescence dimming with each cycle like battery-operated nightlights, slowly running out of power. Over by the honeysuckle vine, a spider paused mid-web repair to watch the moon dip behind a cloud, its 8 eyes reflecting the silver light in miniature before it too settled into stillness. Down in the wild strawberry patch, the ripest berries exhaled their sweetest scents into the cooling night air, each tiny seed dimpling the surface like freckles on sleeping cheeks. Up in the tallest pine, an owl feather drifted downward in slow spirals, catching every stray breeze until it landed atop a fern frond that barely trembled under its weight. Meanwhile, the garden's smallest creek continued whispering its bedtime story to smooth stones, the water's words dissolving into bubbles that popped softly against mossy banks. A cluster of baby ferns curled inward like sleeping green fists, their fiddleheads still holding traces of daylight warmth, as dew began tracing silver paths down their furrows. Up in the hawthorn tree, a nest woven from thistledown and spider silk swayed gently, rocking 3 speckled eggs in a rhythm passed down through generations of feathered mothers. Over by the compost heap, earthworms moved through rich darkness with quiet purpose, their bodies leaving trails that glistened like secret maps to tomorrow's breakfast. A gust of wind sent maple seeds spinning through moonbeams, each papery wing catching the light differently, some flashing silver, others turning translucent as they tumbled toward waiting soil. In the raspberry thicket, canes swayed under the weight of dreaming fruit, their thorns softened by moonlight into harmless shadows against plump berries, still warm from the afternoon sun. Meanwhile, the garden's lone praying mantis folded its spiked arms in perfect repose, its triangular head tilted as if listening to the stars whisper coordinates for tomorrow's first hunt. Over by the meadow's edge, a cluster of sleeping butterflies clung to a milkweed stalk like living origami left out overnight, their wings occasionally twitching in response to dreams of nectar fountains and endless summers. Deep in the wild thyme patch, two ladybugs snuggled beneath a dewdrop that magnified their spotted backs into a kaleidoscope pattern that shifted with each tiny breath they took in unison. The pond's surface had grown so still, it perfectly mirrored the crescent moon's smile, creating the illusion that someone had carefully balanced a sliver of polished silver on liquid glass just before bedtime.